So today I'm here with KeelyTaverner from KeyChange, and we are going to be talking about working with difficult people, because we all do. We all work with difficult people, and we all have that certain someone that kind of gets under our skin and makes us feel particular things and do things that we don't necessarily want to. So Keeley is the girl who's going to change all of that. So let me tell you a little bit about KeyChange. From what I've seen on Keely's website, and which is, number one, a fantastic website, by the way. There's so many resources on there. So if you want to work through getting through difficult people, as well as these other things that I'm going to mention, then you need to visit Keely's website. So Keely talks about counseling, psychotherapy, and coaching, and her strapline is helping people understand, heal, and then move on, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Another slogan that Keely has is stay sane, which is really cool. So without further ado, let's welcome Keely. Hi, Keely. How you doing?
Hi, welcome. Thank you, Amanda. I do a podcast too, so I clearly went into welcome mode, but it's a pleasure to be on board. A pleasure not to be interviewing as well, so thank you.
Good. Well, it's good to have you here. So we met on LinkedIn because we were talking, well, I was talking about difficult people. Sometimes we come in contact with people who have a hidden agenda. Sometimes it's not hidden, but it's out there, but it's hidden to us and we don't realize this. And we got talking and I said to you straight away, we need to do a podcast. And I thought this was a fantastic opportunity for us to have a chat, because the business owners that I meet and work with have difficult people. They either work with them, they've taken them on in their company, or they get involved with this. And this isn't just to do with business, this is personal as well. So I just want you to tell us a little bit more about KeyChange, KeyForChange. Okay. There's no about what you do.
Well, so KeyForChange basically came out of a meeting I was at when I was going to be made redundant by the probation service, because it was bizarre. It was the time of the riots and they had clearly started the ball rolling with regards to redundancy. So I was attending this meeting about what to do next with your career. And I was just so incensed that here we were with this riot going on and prisons being full, yet I was being told that my job would no longer be required. And I had a sense that I just didn't like the amount of power my employer had over me, whether there was a demand for my service or not. And it was from that I began to think about what could I do to empower myself. So I'd signed up for I think it was the Coaching Academy, had a free 2-day workshop. And so I'd gone there, and that was where I was speaking to, we were both co-coaching each other. And that's where that idea really came to life. But I think what was else was they told us to action the idea. So it was to send whatever I'd drawn, which was a logo for my business, to send it to someone who did I know who could make a logo? And I knew someone. And that really cemented going from just an idea to taking action. So it really stemmed out of me fundamentally wanting to make a difference as a helping professional, and then realizing in a public sector role, it felt like very much like lip service.
Very good. And there's nothing like accountability, is there? Somebody who's holding your feet to the fire and saying, okay, you've done this, but now go and do it.
Yeah.
So how long have you been in business?
So I began my private practice in 2012 and stayed at my job. So I stayed at my job until 2015, working part-time, just basically juggling a life of working and then dashing out of work to come up to my office. And in 2015, I took a 5-year sabbatical from the probation service. I'm due back to work today. Okay. Clearly, I'm not going back. And so I left in 2015 and threw myself wholeheartedly into private practice.
Amazing. And so on your website, it talks about counseling, psychotherapy, and coaching. Which is interesting because I'm currently doing coaching academy courses for my business as well. I did three coaching qualifications before I found the coaching academy, and it was like, found their 2-day thing, and it was like, oh, we need to carry this on. But tell us more about the counselling and psychotherapy side of stuff that you do.
Yeah, so after I finished my degree, I did a psychology degree at Brunel, which also had a work placement, and I began working at the prison. So when I graduated, I was fortunate enough, I applied for a job and got a job in the prison. And before I naively thought I'd get my degree and that would be it. But then I realized you have to keep going in terms of psychology. And so there was a general ethos that you just continued. I did a master's in psychotherapy, person-centered psychotherapy, which wasn't what my mentor, who was a psychologist, she didn't encourage me to do person-centered because what was in vogue was cognitive behavioral therapy. But for me, I chose the mode of psychotherapy that spoke to my own pain, which was humanistic, which was about not just looking at a person in terms of just your thinking and beliefs and behavior, but in terms of class, race, your access to opportunities. So it's a far more fuller viewpoint of the human condition. And so I worked full-time, studied part-time, and that ultimately led me to the point where, I think for me, what it was about counselling is I was delivering CBT-based programs to prisoners, and they understood it, we both understood it, but there was so much more that we weren't exploring that wasn't being brought up, about trauma, about how people were raised, about, we all need, it was, the reality was helping prisoners needed to be a holistic approach, and that approach wasn't there, and I became frustrated and felt that I needed to really work in a way that made sense to me. And so I was already training, volunteering for Mind. And then for me, what was about counselling, what happened when I trained is I had to have therapy, which was very, when you're a helping professional, that's one thing to want to help others. But when you have to then look into yourself in terms of, why do we want to help? What do I get from helping? What's the trade-off? Why do I have resentment when I don't get back what I give? It just provided a very different dynamic in terms of a better way for me to live. And so I think that's why I kind of began to really move in that direction, and found some conflict with the psychologists because they were trained and thought in a different way. And so I kind of just ended up becoming, as Malcolm Glad would say, a bit of an outlier to some degree. And then it just became clearer and clearer that I'd have to make it a way on my own if I wanted to work in a way that really resonated with my soul.
Mm-hmm. I hear that. Yeah. And that's a journey I've been on myself, of understanding what holds me back. It's listening to those same stories and kind of getting sick and tired of hearing the same story that I'm telling myself, or the same pattern that happens over and over and over again. And I got to the point where it's like, I can't keep doing this, not only to myself, but to other people. What do I need to do? And I ended up going away for 12 days, went to Thailand, completely changed my life. The women's retreat that I went on completely changed my life. I went out as a very different person and came back for somebody who wanted to speak her truth and say, this is me. And if this isn't what you like, it's okay. I'm just going to keep going on because there's people out there that need me. And there's people out there that don't want me, but I'm now okay about that. So when you step into that power, you know that there's no stopping you. There's just no stopping you. So can I ask if you can elaborate a little bit more on the way in which you work with people?
Yeah, so people often come to me when they've been everywhere else. There's no two ways about it. They've done retail therapy, aromatherapy, massage therapy. They got the Gucci bag and all the bits to boot. And there's a sadness to them that sometimes people come because they're like, well, I've heard you're a bit different. So people come to me when they kind of can't work it out. They can't move forward on their own anymore. And they want to understand, for example, intimate relationships is an area where I specialize, why they keep going around in vicious cycles. So that's the kind of point, you know, if anyone phones me, I'm always interested in what got you to the point now. Why now are you calling? So I'm always interested in their pain point. So let's be honest, it's usually that the pain is got to the point where people feel compelled to take action because they just know that what they're doing is no longer working. And at some extreme cases, you know, some people kind of feel that hopelessness and despair is kicking in. And, you know, if that continues, that takes people potentially to the root of the ultimate act of self-harm. So there's something, an innate drive in them, something is pushing them. Mm-hmm. From a Rogerian perspective, we call it the actualizing tendency. So they want to live. And so they come to me, I think, to find out how to live in a way that is better for them, more harmonious for them, where they stop harming themselves, stop playing small, stop saying yes to people that treat them bad. And often we get over the headline issues. Say, for example, it's a relationship issue that someone comes for. Underneath all of that is potentiality. You know, what part of your dream did you give up on? Why don't you say yes to having the banjo lessons if you want to have, you know, banjo lessons? Why don't you go to the dance classes? Once the headline issue is pushed back, there's all this potentiality that is often dormant or not invested in. Sometimes if we've invested in so many other people, ultimately we've neglected ourselves. And that for me is always the fascinating journey of what we both discover about my client together. And actually what I also discover about myself through them too, because I think it's a co-created relationship.
It is a co-created relationship, and that's just a beautiful way of putting it. So thank you. I think a lot of people don't realize that life is so deep, and we have to kind of face those fears head on to be able to get through them. I delivered a course today for somebody, and I talk about what's holding you back, because, you know, I talk about part of the story about me in Thailand, but actually marketing is something that people are terrified of. They have a fear of putting themselves out there, putting their heads above the parapet in case somebody turns around and goes, oh, well, I wouldn't have done it that way, or check that out, that doesn't look right, or they're incorrect, feeling like an imposter. And all of these different beliefs come up and for marketing. And it's so much deeper than that. Marketing and business are such a personal affair that you have to make sure that you're comfortable in putting yourself out there, but also being seen as who you really want to be seen as, that authentic self, you know. So you mentioned a couple of things about relationships, toxic relationships, because I've had a look at your website and there's so much that you can help people with, you know, self-esteem, toxic relationships, bullying, online stalking, social media addiction. There's just so much here that you can help people with. But one of the things that we got talking about was narcissism. And I just wanted to mention that quote Jim Rohn wrote. You are the sum of the 5 people you hang around with. It's not necessarily the exact thing, but that's essentially what it's about. You are the sum of the 5 people you hang around with. And sometimes we hang around with people who we believe are good for us, but actually other things happen. So I just want you to talk a little bit more about what is narcissism, because some people don't know what it is.
Yeah, narcissism is an area of fascination for myself, because ultimately it was what got me into psychotherapy. Ultimately is that I was in a relationship with someone who was particularly incredibly selfish, and as a fairly selfless person, it ended up in this one-way dynamic where I gived and gived and gived and promoted this person, put them on a pedestal, and in doing so I totally diminished and almost annihilated myself. And so I think that for me is always where I've begun. And so in terms of thinking about narcissism, whether it's an employment or relationship, it's almost like a god complex that person has, where they need to be worshipped and adored and praised by the people around them. And when people clock understand this unhealthy dynamic that is going on, then you're highly likely to experience the narcissist's wrath, which can be very difficult. So it's a toxic relationship. But also, as I've evolved, it's also about the empath as well. So that's, the narcissist always needs someone who's highly empathic to co-create the relationship. So we also, as the empathic people, have to also be growing our awareness of how we also facilitate those relationships as well, which can sometimes be hard, because sometimes we view ourselves as victims, which is fine, sometimes we are. But the more self-aware we can grow is we say, oh, okay, so for example, if I unblock that person, or, when they come back with a different angle, if we're continuously feeding in or saying yes, which happens because they're quite manipulative and tricky, we have to become conscious about what we also do in terms of feeding into their need for adoration. Yeah.
So because I've had many of these kind of people in my life, and I've heard of stories that are horrendous, and I'm sure that you have as well. And it wasn't until the fourth or fifth kind of encounter, I was like, there's something about a particular person. Obviously, names are going to stay out of this, but a particular person, and it was like, there's something not quite right here. And my observation, my attention to detail my observation skills are quite high. And my observation of how they treated certain people when they were around other people was very interesting. And it was kind of like having a bird's eye view and watching them and how they reacted. But it took like 4 or 5 different times to be in their presence, because we were in different areas of the UK. So when we were together, it was like, this is interesting. Why is this? Yeah. And why is it that I feel this particular way? To pull away from somebody like that felt like very painful. So how can people know that they're in this kind of relationship?
Well, I think usually by the time people get to me, they've started to Google around.
Okay.
So they already have a little bit of insight, or they found my book and they've kind of come in that way. I think there is something about the dynamic that you realize. You start to think there's a part of you that kind of becomes alert that there's something about my behavior that's not right here. Or you feel that they've afflicted you, yet when you've gone to mention the affliction, that's the gaslighting, when it gets flipped around and you come away thinking, oh, well, maybe it was me. So you end up becoming conflicted about what's going on. And sometimes often what happens is you might say something to somebody else and they'll be like, oh no, that's that, go and research. And then people discover. But usually what really alerts people is just the unnecessarily difficultness. And no matter how much you try to bend and adapt, you can never get it right. And then the whole eggshell, because often they can be quite moody as well, and they change and morph. So that in itself can create an anxiety. And I know for myself, that in itself was that it was just so not who I was, that in itself made me alert to this is not right. So I think there's an alert system we have within. Sometimes we may have exhausted all options and we can't work it out. And those are the moments that often provide that wake-up call.
Yeah, indeed. I'm sitting here nodding my head going, yep, all of that happened. And through various people, as I said, and there was a time I remember sitting there thinking, what else could I do? What else could I do to make this right or change? And I was so overthinking the whole situation of, well, I tried that before and that didn't work. Maybe I could do it this way. Maybe I could do it that way. And it was all about me changing my behavior and what I was saying. And I was thinking, well, that doesn't really feel like me. If I say that, well, I'll try that anyway and try this. And it didn't matter with every single one of these people, it did not matter how I changed my situation. I couldn't appease them. I just couldn't. And I think that's the other thing. You've mentioned two things there, Keely. One is about being self-aware. So how do people how do people do that more? What I call it the whisper. It's like something happens and I hear this thing. It's not, nobody's saying it to me, but it's just in my own head. But something saying, this isn't right. Or take a step back. Just review the situation. Think this through again. There's something that happens for me about self-awareness that goes, oh, hang on. Yeah. But also you mentioned gaslighting. So we need to just talk about those two things. So how can people make themselves more self-aware? Is there a process?
I think fundamentally, this is often the depth of the work is really leads to the inner child work in terms of the victim of someone who's, you know, a narcissist, when we get caught in the dynamic. And I think that process can help with self-awareness. Sometimes, not all the time, it can be replicating a difficult relationship with a caregiver. Not in all instances, but that can be often the root. So self-awareness is very much dependent on how much we trust our inner voice as well. You see, so if for some people they've never done, you know, the self-development aspect of work, then some people don't trust their intuition, they don't trust their inner voice. So you can sort of be like, that can be a real double bind if you don't trust in yourself. And I think one of the benefits of having a president like Donald Trump is that that term narcissism is becoming a part of the everyday language, which is really helpful, because I'd never heard of the term and had to kind of go, you know, kept researching, and I found these personality disorders, because that's what they are. There is a disorder of mood, and it comes under a personality disorder. So I think that's really important in terms of just being, you know, that this is a generic answer, but there are also deep roots. And I think self-awareness can be, you know, provoked through things like journaling. So, you know, you take time out to just express your inner world. Self-awareness is also in that pause you mentioned, being able to not react. So we take time out and learn to respond. I think that's really important as well. And that whisper, that echo of a voice, like I said, if you're someone who doesn't trust in that voice, this is a real double bind. But if you trust in that voice, connect with that voice, you can start to note down what are you saying to yourself? You know, what are the things that you're starting to notice? Because often for people who are very empathic, we turn inward straight away. Our first point of call is to blame ourselves, or to, as I often call it, we take disproportionate self-responsibility. And, you know, this is why I support a lot of my trainee therapists with, is that the thing is we promote self-responsibility, but in relation to getting into a toxic relationship with someone who's unnecessarily difficult, it's actually unhelpful to be so responsible, because it means we justify, explain away that person's difficult behavior. You know, so there's lots of dynamics that feed into that, but ultimately I think it's about also investing in your own personal development as well. Yes, is really fundamental. Things like meditation are also, you know, particularly helpful. And, you know, for so many of my clients who just generally tend to be very empathic people, it's the challenge of disproportionate self-responsibility that is really catches us out. And I don't think we're, you know, because it's so important to be self-responsible, it's often bizarre to consider that from a different perspective, which actually, it's not your fault. There's nothing you can do. They're unnecessarily difficult. But that can also tap into our ego, because we have to learn to let go. And for some of us, we think being nice will always yield us the results, because we think being nice is common. They think, oh, well, surely if I'm nice, but they think it's reciprocal. Don't realize it's a gift. So it's to be very careful of that, and to trust the voice and to ask others. I think also just staying with yourself is a part of the problem, you know. So just sort of teasing that out with other people and seeing what they say. I think in terms of gaslighting, it always reminds me of Shaggy's song "It Wasn't Me." So you're kissing on the counter. It wasn't me. It's, you know, it's almost like you can catch someone in the act, and somehow they can flip it. And again, if you don't trust in yourself, if you don't believe in yourself, you'll be thinking, oh, well, oh yeah, maybe it was me, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's how that doubt comes in, but also trade on you not trusting in yourself. And so, you know, as a therapist, I'm always going to be very interested about that, where that root is from in terms of, you know, just not honoring your truth, you know, and that can just be even just psychologically, not even before we go out in terms of verbal or behavior, but what that means for us to honor our truth internally would be something that I'm particularly interested in. So gaslighting really trades on self-doubt. And as long as that is in place, as long as that process is in place, that you'll value that person's judgments over your own and diminish your own, then that process is effective. And when the empath, you know, gets woke, then, you know, then you might then start to notice the sanctions that begin to take place depending on the power dynamics. Yeah. You know, so whether that's intimate relationships, whether that's in business, whether that's with your boss, you'll then start to notice power dynamics, which again is something interesting to observe, but can be very difficult when you're being sanctioned as well. Very difficult. Yeah,
I could sit here and listen to you all day. And the reason is because psychology, I haven't got a psychology degree, I haven't done any qualifications in it, but actually it's part of what I do as a marketer. A lot of people think marketing is the elements, the activities, the methods, the technology. It's not. Marketing is all about the psychology. It's understanding at what level do these people need to see this message to know that it's right for them. There's ways in which you can market to people that are unethical, unmoral, and all of those kind of things. And there's ways that you can do it authentically as well. But this whole topic of the psychology behind how and why things are the way they are because of people. That's what it's about. It's all about people, and it's not about that we're not compatible. It's just that we all do things differently. I remember the conversation that we started with the other week, and I think I said something like, oh, and they do X, and you went, interesting. It's not just them though, is it? You know, we also have to look at, you know, one of the things I'm going to take away from today is that you're mentioning we've got to look at our behavior too. Whether our behavior is right or wrong. Yeah. Whose is right or wrong.
Yeah, but whether we enable it, you see. And so that's where the root comes into play, which is where, you know, inner child work, depending on, you know, in terms of when people, you know, all roads will lead to inner child work. Because often we can often be responding from yesteryear, you know, and so it's about me helping people to realize that actually some of that behavior was helpful to you to cope, to survive, to thrive in sometimes hostile environments, hostile family dynamics. But now it's working against you, you know, so that is a really important realization, and the tentative steps we take to change. So there's no epic change. We don't want that because it can be often too disruptive, but tentative change is really important. So in terms of even just trusting in the voice, you know, is a massive step. Yeah. You know, depending on what the whole inner child dynamic is.
Yeah, it's magic, everything that you're talking about. Only because I remember when I went to Thailand, I went, the intention was acceptance. And actually, when I came back, I realized it was acceptance of self, not of everybody else. And when it was like the biggest aha light bulb, oh my God, moment of, I've got to, it's me. This is all in me. I'm capable of so much. And when you're able to trust that voice, because for years I didn't. For years I just thought it was against me or telling me to do these things because of X, Y, and Z. And, you know, we all have this voice, whether it works for us or it doesn't. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But when you're like, okay, I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to do something about it, and then you do it, and whatever it is works, then that's your first step into the acknowledgement of, I have a problem because I'm thinking about these stories, issues, people, challenges, but actually what can I do to face my fears, trust myself, so that I've got the answer? And it's working with people like you, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, I'm very fortunate, you know, that I have a very intimate journey with people. And, you know, sometimes when people come at the beginning, like, you know, where will I be by 10 sessions? And I think, well, sometimes I don't know, but we're gonna get to the root of the issue, because I'm very good at doing that. But what I'll discover about you, what we'll discover together, I feel goosebumps already. I could never imagine, see, and neither could they. But we then realize how much of the self has been denied, not accepted, you know. And sometimes the beauty of that is then we can be grateful for to the narcissist, the unnecessarily difficult person, because without this pain, we wouldn't have been able to evolve. But the key is always, how can we make that pain purposeful? Okay. So that we then learn self-acceptance, learn to trust our inner voice, learn to say no. You know, this is very important for people who have perpetually said yes to their own detriment. Trust in our own greatness. Say yes to the dance lessons. Invest in the self. So it's got such an opportunity for revolution. But also with that comes some disruption in our lives, because some people will have traded on us being the yes person, being selfless, in order for their own elevation. And so that's also the landscape I support people to navigate, you know, because those sanctions and the reprisals for authenticity, the evolving authenticity, can be incredibly unfair. So power and dynamics often come into, you know, and we've spoken about an inferiority complex, and that in itself can mutate as well and impact on our capacity to say yes to ourselves, and, you know, our capacity to hold our boundaries, people we put on pedestals. So there's all those dynamics that come into the fore, but we navigate them.
It sounds amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. Because the other thing, you know, to come into talking about, you know, working with difficult people, it isn't just narcissism. There are lots of other things out there that happen. But how can you give 2 tips on what people can do if they're currently working with difficult people? What would you say that they would be their first steps to either set the boundary, step away from the relationship, or?
Yeah, I think firstly, if it's in a work environment, I think evidence-based practices are the most fundamental thing that you need to do for yourself. So that would be following up with emails after conversations, because you never want to get into that dynamic of I said, you said. We need evidence to back up what has gone on. So I think that is of incredible importance, and you just never know where you may need that as well. For some people, depending on the nature of their employer, you can also access EAP services, employee assistance programs. So sometimes that's also been beneficial to people. I know when I worked for probation service, I accessed that when I was caught in another dynamic with regards to narcissism in the workplace. So those are some of the resources. The 2 tips I would encourage people to think about. But I'd say thirdly, talk to other trusted people, because how abuse works is in isolation. you know, sometimes just between you and that person. It can be also co-created in groups, but you'll also need a safe base. So also think about who you tell, trusted people who you can talk to, so that you don't feel like you're going mad. You know, that is of real importance, to have your own safe circle.
Yeah. And if people don't have a trusted person, somebody like you is a good option for them.
Yeah, well, I think the challenge is, once it becomes toxic and, you know, you're scared of going to work, you know, you've gone to your doctors for anxiety medication, or your doctors have referred you for medication. For a lot of my clients, they've been to doctors because they've been very tired. So they've had blood tests. So often what might happen is you might have a range of psychosomatic symptoms. Irritable bowels can be another one. The grinding of teeth. So a lot of my clients have been to the dentist and all of a sudden they need a gum shield, or that the jaw's flinching, and a tooth at the back has become loose. Mm-hmm. These are very important psychosomatic signs. And I think it's really sad that sometimes dentists aren't clued up. I think they know, but I've tried to reach out to dentists for us to work together, because so many of my clients have to wear gum shields. And I can tell when they're at stress, because sometimes their jaw is more sharp. I talk to her, I say, what's up? Mm-hmm. Because the more that I can barely hear the words, because I know that they're stressed. So remember, what doesn't get expressed gets repressed. I know that will also start to have physical impacts. Mm. Irritable bowel. I've had a fair few clients who've been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and then 3 months later, they don't have Crohn's. And often that is because of the emotional, I call it the emotional constipation. So these are all physical signs. And sadly, sometimes our doctors aren't always saying to us, you know, what stresses do you have on in your life? Yeah. You know, how would you rate that out of 0 to 10? Have you thought about talking to someone? That in itself can be very helpful. But the body doesn't lie.
It doesn't. And I know, you know, when you talk about the whatever's not expressed is repressed, you know, having your, without going too woo-woo, you know, your throat chakra, you want to say stuff, you want to talk, but you feel like you can't. You feel like nobody's going to listen or want to listen to the problems or issues that you have. And actually having somebody there that literally just listens. They don't tell you, they don't know how to tell you how to fix you. They don't tell you, here's my advice. They don't here's my opinion. It's just about listening so that you can get it off your chest, and work with somebody who's there and has no agenda. Whether, you know, they're trying to make you not have that relationship or have it, whatever. So thank you for those tips. So with regards to business, I'm going to ask you, what has been your biggest challenge as a business owner?
I think if I'm very, very honest with you, I think an inferiority complex. Who do I think I am is a voice that I've battled with, you know, for many years. I'm mixed race. I have a black mum and I have a white dad. I'm from an estate in Brent in London. And I think the battle for me has been one of class transition as well. You know, being worried that I'm a sellout and I've forgotten my roots. And then also, you know, sometimes not fitting in my new groups either. And so sometimes being the sort of watcher and the observer. And so I think for me, a simulation of all of who I am, you know, has been a real battle, you know, and now I'm in a place, I have offices, I rent therapy rooms to other therapists. So I often have people who would have been my employers who now come to me to hire rooms or ask me about business ideas. And I'm so incredibly grateful that I took the risk and invested in me, because no one could have ever given me the opportunity I've created for myself. So I think for me, it's, you know, that inferiority complex has been a massive issue for me, yet something inside has just kept encouraging me to just keep saying, yes, come on, just give it a go. And so I've kept just following the crumbs, following the clues, pursuing what I love, creating and you know, by God's grace, because it's had to be spiritual for me, because when I think about it, I couldn't see a way that it would work. You know, I didn't have anybody else. I was the first person in my family to go to university. So I didn't have that pioneering ahead of me to be like, okay, well, I'll follow auntie. So for me, it's been a very spiritual walk, one of a faith-based walk. And every single day I create my reality. You know, here I am on a podcast. I'll be seeing clients this afternoon. And so, yes, it has been about really, truly believing in myself, you know, and being open to my insecurities, my vulnerabilities, and actually embracing them rather than shying away. Because the more articulate I am about my battles, is the more people are like, she knows. She knows. And for me as a therapist, it's a real challenge because my industry promotes non-self-disclosure. So as many of my coaches said, well, Keely, your story is your biggest selling point. And I've often felt gagged by an industry where I'm supposed to be like a blank slate, you know, whereas actually I've surrendered to that now, because people resonate with my battle for authenticity, and it speaks to them, it speaks to their pain. And, you know, so it leaves me in this place of becoming, not because I went out to be a pioneer, a maverick. It was never in my intention, you know. And I think one of the challenges is sometimes loneliness, isolation, thinking I'm too much. And, you know, I could park those voices, and I know, because when the phone rings, people come to me because they want to live a better life. You know, there's all this stigma with psychotherapy, and, you know, the fear. And, you know, it's one of the big challenges on social media, that I don't get comments, but I get inboxes. You know, there's this stigma and shame. And actually, I represent what I serve. You're talking to a girl who worked 10 years at IKEA on the checkouts, who started to read a self-help book and just kept saying yes to all the clues from the universe. And here I am. So I think that has been the biggest challenge, because once I've surrendered to that, then you know how it works. Opportunities come your way, and a way is made in a way you would never imagine if you sat there and tried to work it out yourself. So I'm so grateful.
No, I hear what you're saying. I definitely hear what you're saying, because you're right. It is, for me, is the same. It's how much do you believe in yourself? And I think that when I got to that point of this thing that keeps happening, these stories, this whatever, I need to do something about it, because I know, without arrogance, I know I'm here to do bigger and better work. But I can't do that until I remove or get rid of or understand more about what it is that's holding me back. And when you step into that authenticity, and a lot of, it's a word that's being bandied around left, right, and center at the moment, authenticity. And I think a lot of people think that authenticity is really about being vulnerable. It's about sharing a story and crying and getting upset and all of that kind of stuff, when actually it's not. It's just being true to what you believe in, even if nobody else believes in it. It's your story, it's your belief, it's your truth, nobody else's. And when you can live like that, you know, as exactly what you were saying, everything else just falls into place. You know, you put out to the universe, these are the things that I want, and then they just arrive, and you're like, oh, I'm doing it. So thank you so much, Keely, for being a part of this today. I think it's been very useful. I think we've gone from talking about working with difficult people to actually self-reflection, looking at yourself. And yes, there are difficult people out there, but actually sometimes it's not us, sometimes it's not how we are behaving, but it's about how we react, you know, going back to one of the things that you said. So today has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you about this, because I literally could talk to you about all day about it. So the final thing, well, two things. What has been the best marketing tool, technique, thing that you've done to help you in business today?
I think video for me. I think video has been good personally and professionally, because there's something about having to look at myself on video. I've lost weight. I've fixed up my appearance. So as ever with my work, it's like it feeds me and I feed them and they feed me. So it's been reciprocal. You know, I have a library of videos on YouTube. There's not much topics around psychology that I can't just refer people to. So I think video has been really important for me. And it's really important to get out of your own way, because when I used to worry about my hair or my weight, I used to always say to me, the message is the message. It's not about you. So it was a very good way to get out of the ego.
Yeah.
You know, I'd be thinking about the person who would have been like me, maybe a single mom on her own and felt hopeless. And I always felt like I was speaking to her.
Video is so powerful, so powerful, and it puts across your face. It puts across how you are, the micro movements that you make and how you think. It shows people how you relate to them as well. I think video is very powerful. So thanks very much. I always talk to my clients about video and they go, no, I don't want to do that. But video is amazing.
Yeah. But video also gets into how people view their face. You know, so that's something about how we feel about our looks also comes up in video. And for me, that's one of the reasons why it was so important to just try to get over that, to push that voice away and to accept myself as I am.
Yes.
Yeah. That's why I do video.
You've been amazing. So, question for you: how do people get in touch with you if we've taken them into a place where they need a little bit of help?
Yeah, so my website is KeyForChange.com. I'd say go there and you'll find all the links to all the other areas where you'll find me. I'm usually on social media most days, Instagram or Facebook. Awesome. So yeah, website KeyForChange.com. You can use the number 4 or FOR, because I've bagged both websites now.
Yes.
Makes sense.
All about the keywords. Keely, it's amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. Please go and have a look at Keely's website. There are ebooks on there. She's got some free resources on there. And obviously you can then schedule a call if you feel that Keely is the right person for you. Okay, so if we've touched on things that have come up for you, now is the time really to have a think about, do you want to do something about it, or do you just want to leave it? Because sometimes,
as I mentioned, the empath self-protection code is on the website. That's just been done this week, because learning how to best protect ourselves as empaths, kind, selfless people is incredibly important.
Very true. I remember, you've just mentioned something there. I remember that one of these people that I had, had a problem with, because of how they made me feel and spoke to me and that kind of thing. They said to me one day, "You're too kind. You're too kind. You shouldn't be like this. You should be more like this." And it's like, I actually questioned myself. Thought, should I? I didn't realize that I was kind, because it's not something that you really think about. It's just what you do. And I got into the way of, I wasn't being mean or nasty, but it was like, okay, well, maybe I should be more like this. But that was more to do with them and fitting in with them and what they wanted and their agenda.
Well, often what's happened is, because of often how they've been brought up and their own trauma, they bury their own kindness. And so they can often be repulsed by people's kindness.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Because it's an indicator of what has been pushed aside in themselves. Because actually, if they've been brought up in a very difficult environment, then their kindness wasn't available. So they've detached from that and they loathe it in other people. And that's why if you're kind to them, and sometimes kind, empathic people keep being kind, you're getting caught in an dynamic, you actually repulse them. And then they trade on your kindness, because they actually get a kick out of your being humiliating you.
Yeah, I hear that too. I hear that too. Today's been fantastic, Keely. Thank you so much. Please do get in touch with Keely if you need to, and have a look at her website, because it is fantastic.